Chapter 39. Damned. "Those slug-munching, worm-trousered, cut-fouling, thrice-damned—" Not even the wind could drown out the curses shouted into Hiccup's ears. "Astrid, I'm going to break their knees backwards with the handle of my axe," Astrid swore. "I'm going to geld each and every one of them so that no woman will ever have to suffer their children, and I'll rid the world of the arrogant, insufferable—" "Astrid," Hiccup said again with measured calm, "you are hurting me." The deadly grip she had on his sides barely lessened. "Trust me, I'm restraining myself as much as I can," she said with dark promise. Hiccup took that as an apology and focused flying due east. The silence lasted only a moment before Astrid lost her cool again. "Ah!" she screamed into his ear. "The nerve!" "Save it for the meatheads, will you?" Hiccup snapped. He had been trying to keep a level head himself, but Astrid's insistence on expressing her rage over the situation fed his ire. Of all the dragons the meatheads had captured, hers was the only bond to be taken. The meatheads had quite a bit in store for them when they caught up to their ships. Upon discovering their treachery, Hiccup wasted as little time as possible before he gave pursuit. He first went to the safe island to check out the veracity of the Brown's message. Indeed, a number of the dragons were missing. Some were even injured, probably those that fought back. Worst yet, Hiccup didn't know how many of the missing dragons had fled at the aggression and how many were captured. Of those missing was Chip, and with Chip went Astrid's composure, for she knew he would not willingly abandon her. Hiccup glanced down at his sides, where only the white knuckles of Astrid's fingers could be seen, the tips buried into his vest with a clawed grip. The only barrier between them was Astrid's saddle, which was held fast between their torsos. Astrid had every intention of riding her dragon after she rescued it. When Hiccup returned to Berg, a loose damage assessment in his mind, Stoic was waiting. Together, father and son constructed a quick and rather substandard rescue mission as Hiccup suited up in his vest and mask. Time was wasted in deciding which riders would go on dragonback. Hiccup tried to express the dangers of flying dragons with unsolidified bonds into the control. He tried to explain the poisonous mists and the power of the demon they would be battling, but no rider would relent. In the end, he had to enlist his father to finalize his decision. Every breath he wasted in arguing was time lost to the meatheads. Those flying would follow Hiccup to head off the meatheads. It would slow Hiccup down immensely, but the head start the meatheads already had could prove to be disastrous. Should they make it back into the demon's control, the captured dragons could turn on them as well. Hiccup needed support over speed. Toughnut, Snotlout, and Speedyfist followed him. Roughnut was too fresh with her Puffnatter, and Vortiehog couldn't yet fly straight on his Gronkle. Behind Snotlout, also riding the monstrous nightmare he named Mongrel, was Fishlegs, whose basic brown was too small to carry him. Astrid insisted Fishlegs stay with them, that his knowledge was invaluable, and Hiccup found he had to agree. He only remembered things he wrote down or experienced, but anything unknown to him was just that, unknown. And Hiccup had a feeling he would need just as much knowledge as support. Hiccup's father sailed in their wake a ways back, burdening Berg's fastest ship with his best warriors. Stoic was nearly as furious as Astrid and Hiccup when he first heard of the meatheads' action against them, though for a different reason entirely. He felt slighted that the meatheads would pull something like this under Berg's hospitality. "Mogodon wouldn't have done this," Stoic had roared during their brief debate on what to do. Hiccup thought Mogodon would have done this. He thought just about any other Viking clan would have, when shown the prospect of dragon aids, without easing into it slowly enough, including Berg. Hiccup knew this was his fault. They had gone too fast with introducing dragons as companions. He had gotten too excited and trusted too quickly. Berg's cooperation had heartened him so much that he neglected to calculate the initial reactions he was never present for. He forgot about the letters, the first of which were sent back when he was with the Magyars, and the subsequent denial that surely followed. "Wings," Toothless announced to the brooding boy. Hiccup squinted against the thick air. It was cloudy and dim, movements from rain going to be heavy wetness in the air, and he feared he would not be able to tell where the poison started in these conditions. "Where?" Hiccup asked. "It's almost in your vision." Nearly as soon as Toothless said it, Hiccup caught sight of the wide, square sail, the meathead sigil of a cleaved dragon, stark against its white like a bloodstain. It weaved between rock stacks characteristic to the nest's barrier. "Shit!" Hiccup hissed. His fingers tightened around From Herja's grip. He could feel her hum against his palm, feeding off his anger. "What is it?" Astrid asked. She eyed the weapon laying across the saddle, just touching the bend of Hiccup's thighs. Hiccup carried it before him so that she could ride passenger without getting hurt. That was his reasoning, anyway. A reasoning that piqued her curiosity. But now was not the time to inquire after his weapon, nor was it the time to confront him on her theory of his scar. "They're heading into the poison," Hiccup said roughly. Astrid peered ahead, quickly spotting their target, only to have it disappear behind the clouded shadow of a stone tower. "We're going to have to follow them," Hiccup went on. "Try not to breathe in too much of the air." Astrid turned in her seat and called back as loudly as she dared, "Poison air! Be careful!" A ways back, Speedy Fist nodded. Astrid saw him turn to relay the message to Snotlout and Fishlegs, and she faced forward once more. "Hold on," Hiccup murmured as a last warning. Astrid felt him lean forward as Toothless pulled in his wings, perfect sync. She mimicked Hiccup's movements as they dove closer to the water. Already the heaviness of the air lessened. "Is it less concentrated down here?" she whispered. "Mostly, yeah." But not enough. They spun and twisted through shadow and rock. It was through her work with Chip that Astrid endured the precarious maneuvers. She trusted Hiccup and Toothless to sense the materializing stacks that seemed to sneak up on them in the thickness of the fog. "They're getting too far in," Hiccup decided when he caught sight of the sail once more. They were closer, at least, and gaining on the meatheads fast. He lifted From Herja from his lap. "Look out," Hiccup said to her. "We may be boarding a ship that's on fire." "What?" Astrid asked, nonplussed. Hiccup ignored her. "We're already well into her control. Be careful." "I'm always careful," Hiccup mumbled as he drew the string tight. Astrid leaned back, curious and weary. Hiccup had no arrows, but he seemed confident in using the weapon. The senselessness of this alone put her on edge. "What are you—" She started to ask, but her voice died in her throat. Light appeared between the rest and the nocking point of the bow, bright and blinding and thinning into a line of pure, screaming energy. "What is that?" one of the guys wailed behind her. From Herja must have looked like a shining star in the haze to them. The light crackled and spit. Astrid was sure she would be burned should she move as much as a hair's breadth closer. Hiccup released the string before the meatheads could turn another corner. Lightning cut through the dim atmosphere and erupted against the mast. Astrid yelped to swear just as the sail went ablaze. She leaned as far away from Hiccup as she could until she practically lay against Toothless's rump. "What was that?" she cried when her voice came back to her. Her chest moved in her fright, gasping in more air than she should have, her eyes wide, riveted on the bow, her heart pounded against the hollow of her throat. "Calm down," Hiccup barked. He was too focused on stopping the meatheads to deal with their reactions, understandable though they may be. Astrid pulled a hand from her chest. It must have leapt to her heart in her startle. "I am calm," she vented. "But that wasn't a weapon. Relax. Don't tell me to. I am relaxed. Shut up." Hiccup could hear Snotlout's profanities behind him and Speedy Fist howling his cheers. Just barely audible beneath their hubbub was Fishlegs rattling off all the reasons of why that arrow should have been impossible. "Where did you get that?" Astrid demanded. She knew more about the wielding of weapons than forging them, but she also knew the limitations of mankind and the materials at their disposal. "Not now, Astrid," Hiccup said shortly. The cries of the meatheads quickly drowned out those of his peers as they came upon the longship. The blaze had spread from the sail to its post, warming its way down to the hull of the ship. This was wrong. There were some powers that men weren't meant to handle. "Later, we are going to talk," Astrid promised to his ear. "But, hey, where's Chip?" They were upon the ship now, but it wasn't the one that Thuggery sailed to Burke on. Though still of meathead build, this ship was wider, with too many men on it, screaming and cursing and scrambling with buckets of water for the fire. The appearance of Toothless and his passengers agitated them further. "Night Fury! It's the outlaw! They're riding it! Get the weapons!" Vikings threw open their sea chests to pull out bolas and axes, spears were snatched from underfoot, and swords unsheathed. Metal clanking against metal ricocheted off an invisible hem of rocks, charging the air with bloodlust. "Where's Thuggery?" Hiccup yelled down over the points of fingers and blades alike.
"Farther ahead,"
one man volunteered. He must have been the appointed captain of the ship, because no one else offered to talk. He had a tall, menacing look about him that chased from Hiccup's mind any thoughts of landing on the boat.
"And the dragons they have with them?"
Hiccup asked with forbearance.
"What happened to them?"
He received blank stares as an answer.
"What dragons?"
asked a different man.
"The ones stolen from our island,"
Astrid spat. Hiccup could feel the grip back on his side. She had gotten over her mistrust of him in her rage. Hiccup knew the Vikings' surprise to be genuine by their faces. Vikings weren't exactly good actors.
"We're just following their trail,"
the pseudo-captain hollered back. He pointed to one of the rock stacks, one close enough to be seen through the mist, where a red mark stained the porous face.
"They called for backup, said they found the nest. We're just following orders."
With a grim set to his face, Hiccup looked into the dense fog and knew they would have to venture further in to find Thuggery. Then he looked behind him to where the rest of their team proceeded to catch up. He turned back to the captain and said in an abrupt manner, "Turn back." The man looked ready to laugh.
"I should think not,"
he cried, and many of his fellows rose to join. They came for glory and victory. No outlaw would deny them this honor. Hiccup's patience had reached its end as the gravity of the situation continued to fester. Faster than anyone could react, Hiccup drew from Hurrier once more and shot a bolt at the stern. Wood and fire exploded on deck. The hull had been pierced, water sloshed into the longship's belly.
"Freya above,"
Astrid swore softly. The meatheads howled in outrage. The flames they once focused on smothering reached out to the fresh blaze. There was no way to extinguish the fire girding the clinkered oak. The ship would sink. Men began to abandon ship, jumping into the ominous calm of the waters below. These were dangerous seas, and Odin knew what dragon or serpent sulked within. Even so, Hiccup knew their safest option was to go no further. Seeing as they refused to heed his warnings, Hiccup felt he had no choice but to relieve them of deciding for themselves. Already they had journeyed too far. Thuggery, if he had any concerns for his men at all, would have to turn back for them.
"Dude!"
Rafnat's voice startled both humans atop the Night Fury.
"How are you guys doing?"
Hiccup called back to the arriving riders, easily ignoring the assault of cussing from below. He could see their faces now, his former peers. Their eyes bulging at from Hurrier, at the men escaping the flames, and from Hurrier again.
I did not see that coming,"
Snotlout admitted. His focus lay solely on the bow in Hiccup's grip.
"It shouldn't be possible,"
Fishlegs murmured from behind the future chief. Dubiety read deep in his frown.
"I don't understand. How did you do that?"
Speedy Fist asked in such a rushed, breathless manner that it was a miracle Hiccup could understand him at all.
"Man," Toughnut huffed, "tell me the lands you got that in. Just tell me. I'll be there."
Much like the disagreement of the meatheads, Hiccup had no time for 20 questions.
"She's going to retaliate,"
he said shortly and sharply.
"Any minute now the demon is going to send them out after us, the dragons, to collect us and drop us into her mouth. And there's going to be so many that we can't possibly survive."
Their eyes had flickered to Hiccup's face possibly once and returned to from Hurrier, but Hiccup knew they listened.
"Follow me as far as you trust, but if your dragons start to fight, you turn around. Do not force them to continue. You'll damn the both of you."
"And what do we do if that happens?" Fishlegs asked as he managed to move his scrutiny to Hiccup. Hiccup ran a tongue across his lips and glanced anxiously at the miasma.
"If anything, stay with our ship when it gets here and protect them from the dragons."
"What about you?" Snotlout asked.
"We'll rescue the dragons and come right back,"
Hiccup assured him.
"And I'm not coming back without ship,"
Astrid promised. She felt nearly as energetic as Hurrier, and Hiccup could only imagine the sort of impatience she must have felt in that moment, wanting to get to Chip as soon as possible while at the mercy of someone else's speed.
"You cannot leave us here to drown!"
Hiccup sent the treading captain a flat look.
"A rescue ship is coming. Until then, I suggest you watch out for sharks."
Then he dove into obscurity, Astrid against his back, and Toughnut and Speedyfist's guffaws lingering in his ears. A heavier pressure on his side told Hiccup that Esther was leaning away from Framheria as best she could without losing security. The girl didn't like surprises, and she didn't like the unknown.
"How you doing, bud?"
Hiccup asked Toothless in a murmur. The dragon had been unusually quiet and dour in his presence.
"Not sure,"
Toothless replied, honest and soft.
"I just have a bad feeling."
Hiccup could pick up on this feeling as well, like some deeper ancestral terror had seated in his chest. The noxious cloud around them stung their skin in its coldness. Hiccup kept low to the water as much as possible, but its viscosity grew nonetheless. Astrid coughed, the noise so untowardly human in the atmosphere that Hiccup started.
"Are you?" "I'm fine,"
she grunted. With one hand, Hiccup unfastened the mouth filter's buckle from his face. He faced some difficulty. The leather was new and stiff and required more concentration than he felt he had.
"Here."
He held the piece over his shoulder.
"I'm not taking—"
Astrid coughed again.
"I will take it back later, but I'm at least accustomed to this."
Already his throat felt heavy and burdened, but he steeled his composure for a strong front. He hoped she couldn't feel the shake of his frame as the proximity of the nest brought on shivers.
"Fine,"
she mumbled, and Hiccup felt the mask leave his hand.
"Are they following?"
he asked. She didn't need to wonder who he referred to.
"I can't see."
Nor could Hiccup. The mist had thickened into a dank cloud.
"They've stopped,"
Toothless stated for his human's benefit.
"It's too strong." "And we're getting too close,"
Hiccup whispered. His insides were a ball of nerves.
"Is it really so bad?"
Astrid asked. Hiccup suspected her mind now fell to her axe, stimulated with the thought of a fight. Astrid had peculiar tendencies, and Hiccup did not know her enough before she met Chip to say if they were a recent development or not. She seemed less stable without Chip. On Chip she kept a more level head, but without him, as Fishlegs once warned him, she had berserker penchants. Toothless jerked up, lurching Hiccup's stomach and causing Astrid to gasp and grab hold of him with both arms. The ship came upon them from the mist so quickly that Hiccup had nearly flown into it. Only Toothless's acute senses saved them from collision. Hiccup's apprehension at the depth in which they had ventured eased, for there were the dragons, 4 of them, chained in pillory.
"Chip!"
Astrid cried the second she spotted the timberjack.
"Thuggery!"
Hiccup snapped in a voice that was not his own. Thuggery looked up, hardly surprised as though expecting him.
"Thought you'd come."
Thuggery grinned. The gap-toothed smile spiked Hiccup's ire.
"Clear out!"
Hiccup snapped just as Toothless fired a bolt of cerulean plasma. The men in its path scattered. The blue fire sailed just above the deck and hit a dangerously close rock stack. Fragments of stone showered the ship. The boys swooped down in a follow-up maneuver and landed on the freshly cleared area. Astrid was off the dragon before Toothless had all 4 paws on the deck. The mask and the saddle clinked against the ground as she sprinted towards Chip. As the first to gather his wits, Thuggery took an aggressive step forward.
"No, wait just a—"
Astrid's fist cracked against his jaw. She moved so fast that the large man hardly saw the swing coming, and the power behind her arm was completely unexpected. For all his broadness, Thuggery stumbled backwards under the blow, mouth bloodied. Astrid was on the move again, without ever losing her stride. Other men moved in to intercept her, weapons materializing in their hands and faces set with menace. Hiccup leapt from the saddle with Framheria's string already drawn.
"Stop!"
he commanded. The men listened to him, if only out of curiosity. Astrid could ignore the phenomenon of Framheria, both for having seen it before and for having greater concerns to occupy her mind. The meatheads, on the other hand, saw a glow emitting from Hiccup's weapon and heard the hiss of a power formerly reserved for the skies. Hiccup fired anyway. Lightning hit the chains holding down a dim bruiser. The dragon shrieked nearly as loud as the surrounding men did from the impact and the lingering fires. The damaged chains gave way to its frantic struggles, and the dragon took off without a spare thought to its aid. Only not towards the nest where Hiccup had half expected it to head. It flew west, towards freedom. A deeper part of Hiccup desperately wanted to follow it with his eyes to figure out how it had overridden the pull of the demon when, to his knowledge, it had never bonded with a human before. But he couldn't. He was too energized, too pressured in the moment. He had to take this one step at a time while still taking into account the big picture. He kept his focus on Thuggery. The boy's jaw had dropped, and a gurgled noise bubbled from his throat in the absence of words. No one dared approach them now, not with Hiccup causing fires as readily as any dragon, and not with the snarling night fury on the ship. For one tense moment, Hiccup and Thuggery stared at one another. Thuggery's lip curled. The side of his face throbbed from the girl's blow.
Stop her!
He barked, pointing a finger at Astrid. Hiccup had from Hurria drawn again, this time aimed at Thuggery. None of the men moved.
"I'd leave her alone, if I were you,"
he said in a voice more light-hearted than he thought himself capable of. From Hurria hummed, warming his cheek with her arrow.
"Instead, why don't you tell me what the hell you were thinking?"
Is that all of them?
Eck grunted at the question, his nod barely perceivable under his multi-braided beard. It was enough for Stoic.
Onward, men!
He commanded to his Burkian crew. Those who weren't holding the soaked meatheads at blade point jumped to the oars.
Oi!
Snarled Shrewberry the shell-shocked, the meathead Thuggery enlisted in leading a support mission.
What's the point of thinking our ship if we're just going to go on anyway?
Control, Stoic answered, in a response very much like one his son would give. He continued to the bow of the ship so he could get the best view of those red markers Snotlout informed them of. "Should we continue further?" Gobber asked uncertainly at his side. They had never pierced this far into Helheim's Gate before. Gobber's stumps ached from the biting cold and the oncoming storm. "We're undermanned, and we have them to look after now. How can we fight dragons and watch over them?" Phlegma padded up to Stoic's other side as quietly as a woman of her size could. "This was supposed to be a quick retrieval mission," she reminded the man. "I suspect your son is right when he says we ain't ready. He's been right a lot as of late."
"Then we'll never be ready," Stoic returned calmly.
Phlegma and Gobber shared a look behind Stoic's back.
"You don't know that,"
Gobber began. "Hiccup seems to have a long-term plan in mind."
"The so-called demon will keep getting stronger,"
Stoic interjected. Phlegma opened her mouth, and the chief quickly added,
"We're here now, and we can lose more men in the next raid than we can afford. Tactically, I think we need to keep pushing forward."
The blonde pursed her lips. "Call it woman's intuition if you must, but I have a feeling we're sailing straight into hell itself. We don't have a full fleet on our hands," Gobber added. Stoic acknowledged all of this.
"Aye, but don't forget, we have them for some extra blades."
He gestured to the shivering Vikings grouped against the rail of the ship.
"We won't help you,"
sneered a nameless meathead who was close enough to overhear their conversation.
"Yes, you will,"
Stoic said darkly, never turning around. He lifted his eyes to the nightmare flying lazy circles overhead. The sight of that scarlet, talon-laden beast made his heart lurch out of habit.
"What say you, boys?"
"Slowpoke and I are totally ready," Speedy Fist trumpeted as he zoomed across the length of the ship.
"I think we can go further," said Snotlout. "What do you say, Mongrel?"
The nightmare rumbled his consent.
"Good," Stoic barked. "Heads up now. Catch together, men."
"Hiccup didn't want us to follow them," Fishlegs shyly interposed. Phlegma nodded at the large youth, crossing her arms. "Then maybe, given Hiccup's recent expertise on the matter, we should respect his wishes," she said to the chief.
"The hell we are!"
Axel Hofferson's bold announcement broke through the privacy of the conversation. The man stormed the length of the ship towards Stoic and jabbed a stubby finger in their current direction. "That boy of yours has my daughter in there with him. I don't care if I have to swim in these damn waters. I'm going after her." Stoic turned to Spiteloud, who had taken seating on the other end of the ship. His brother appeared every bit as troubled as Axel.
I can't, in good conscience, let children fight this battle for us."
Phlegma closed her eyes so that she wouldn't have to see Stoic nodding his accord. She worried for the children as much as anyone, but this was a fool's errand. "And our dragons aren't pulled into the control yet," Snotlout added. He expressed the point casually, but something in the words caused Fishlegs to narrow his eyes. "You know," the heavier man said, "I think we might actually have a chance of getting to the nest if we arrive with the ships." Snotlout twisted his torso so that he could look Fishlegs in the face. "Say what?" "What was it Hiccup said?" Fishlegs mumbled to himself. He hardly noticed the stares gathering at his feet. "That there's something about humans that buffers her control?" Yes, What if it's more than just proximity? What if we gain power in numbers? Snotlout rolled his eyes and knocked the other boy on the shoulder. That's stupid. Let's leave the hypothesizing to Hiccup. Stung, Fishlegs glowered at the back of Snotlout's curly-horned helmet. Since when do you know that word? He asked scathingly. Learned it from you, Snotlout said brightly. Did I use it right? Fishlegs raised his eyes to the heavens. Odin help us when you become chief.
We're moving on, Stoic said, calling for the boy's attention, regardless if you follow or not.
Well, Fishlegs sounded the word on his tongue slowly, making his final decision. The dragons have shown less signs of losing control than Hiccup led us to believe. I think we can move forward as well, so long as we stay near you.
I wouldn't want to move forward unless you stayed near us, Stoic admitted dryly.
It was the closest he had ever come to confessing weakness. From further down the ship, Rafnat bit her lip and glanced at Fidget. The puff-netter, always aware when someone admired her sheen, cocked her head back at her human and bubbled her throat in a croaking burp. Rafnat gave Fidget a small smile and rubbed the temporarily expanded hide. She had been adamant that Fidget came along, and it was agreed to so long as the dragon behaved, but Hiccup had insisted she not ride Fidget, lest she lose control in flight. Apparently, Rafnat didn't have the experience Hiccup thought was necessary to make her own judgment calls. What was worse, he got his father to enforce this decision so that both human and dragon were boat-bound. Rafnat felt all sorts of irritation towards the Fury Rider at that moment.
Think you can ride her?
Tufnot asked. Rippy had perched on the edge of the hull, with his talons drilling into the woodwork for support and Tufnot balancing at the edge. He had watched his friends hover over the transfer of the meatheads, content to let Rippy rest his wings for the moment. Personally, Tufnot didn't care what decision the chief came to. So long as Rippy continued to respond to him, he was going in there.
I can ride if you can,
his sister sneered. Tufnot reined in the impulse to answer her aggression with more aggression.
It's not like that, Ruff, and you know it.
This wasn't about sibling rivalry. They had very different dragons and very different experiences in riding dragons.
I'd rather you didn't,
Tumble grunted between pulls of his oar. Rafna turned on him.
You don't get to make that call.
The redhead frowned up at her, never losing stride with his fellow oarsman.
That thing loses control.
That thing has a name.
Right, Tumble blew out, looking to the side. He didn't want to argue, not in the margins of Helheim's Gate, not when they were so close to death. Rafnat was uncomfortably aware of the nearby Vikings watching them, of her brother watching them. Everyone knew she and Tumble were to be wed in 2 weeks' time, and people still doubted the prosperity of such a match. Rafnat reckoned they were waiting for her to scare him out of it before the wedding. Sometimes she herself thought he would wake up one morning and see the error in his proposal.
Look,
Rafnat began in her coarse voice, but an inhuman scream overpowered whatever she had been ready to say. The oarsmen stilled, the meatheads quieted, and the commanders of the ship peered into the white murk with uneasy attention. The call itself was abrupt, but it lingered between the labyrinth of stone, rippling through water and fog, to strike their ears and nerves over and over again.
What, Stoic breathed, was that?
Even in the silence of the cry's wake, he could feel his body tense. I think that was the demon, Fishlegs proposed. Gobber looked at his friend and chief. Still want to move forward? The 1001 things Hiccup wanted to say to Thuggery blanked from his mind as a bone-chilling sound snaked around them. She knows. She's mad. She knows.
You need to get your men out of here,
Hiccup rushed.
You're going to die.
Men began laughing, but Hiccup felt no heed for their jeer. Gods above. The shores of the nest were visible, and Hiccup's insides felt as icy as the mist that touched his skin. Hiccup had never approached the nest from below before. The one and only time he came so near was flying high, and it was night-time. He had not known there was a beach to this volcano. He had not known the ships could moor.
You need to get out of here,
he said again.
All of you. Thuggery.
A shadow fell over Hiccup's face as he struggled with himself. Now was not the time to shout and swear at the air. Nor was it the time to smash the handle of his sword into his nose.
I expected better of you.
Hiccup! Astrid's voice called for Hiccup's consideration. The chains of the timberjack rattled, and Hiccup knew something was wrong, but Thuggery had taken a step forward.
What else do you think I would do? Thuggery heckled. We know where the nest is. We know how to get there. We know what's in there, thanks to you.
You don't know,
Hiccup snapped. He had relaxed his grip on Firmhuria's jaw. The light fizzled out.
You have no idea. You aren't prepared to fight her. None of us are yet. We have to be smart about this, because she could obliterate us.
Chip made a racket thrashing against his irons. Hiccup cringed. It seemed too loud for where they were. A red flag waved to an enemy whose notice he wanted to avoid.
Hiccup!
Astrid cried again. Hiccup saw her pulling on Chip's chains, trying to stay him long enough to free him, but the dragon did not recognize her. He tossed and twisted and screamed, with wings bound to his sides to keep him from freeing himself, only seeing Astrid as an enemy. She couldn't risk axing the binds, with his struggles endangering him so. Hiccup felt a muted pain for Astrid. He knew the truth she refused to acknowledge, even when it stared her in the face. He knew if he freed Chip the way he freed the dim bruiser, that the timberjack would leave. Before he could say as much, Thuggery was in his face once more.
We are prepared to fight,
the brunette declared. He pounded his chest in a standard Viking testimony.
That's what we came for.
Hiccup ignored the hurrahs of Thuggery's allies.
It's not the fight you think you're getting. You don't understand what she's like,
Hiccup warned.
We are not waiting any longer. No one can wait any longer.
Thuggery shouted back, and a few more hearty cheers rose from his men. Frustrated, Hiccup continued to push his point.
We may have one shot to kill this thing. Don't waste it on glory.
I'd rather waste it on glory than sit around doing nothing.
Thuggery had been making a habit of raising his voice at the end of his sentences, like he was delivering a motivational speech to his men, and they were eating it up.
Chip, stop!
Astrid continued to try and calm the timberjack, to no avail. The dragon lost more of its reason the closer they drifted to the clearing shores of the nest. Hiccup cast her a helpless look. The urgency was mounting, and he didn't know where he should be directing his attentions. He sent Thuggery his coldest stare.
There was a time when you knew when to listen to me,
Hiccup said, dark in his deliverance, but fraught. It worked. Whatever Hiccup had been going for had worked, because Thuggery seemed to have come out of his game of playing war. For the first time since landing on the ship, Thuggery did not look at Hiccup as an intruder or as an obstacle, but as an old acquaintance from summers past.
We're not kids anymore, Hiccup,
Thuggery said in his own low tones. He was talking to him now, to Hiccup, not to his men.
I'm the leader of my village, and it was my village I was thinking of when I chose to use your information to our benefit.
You're not thinking long-term enough,
Hiccup expressed.
Thuggery, you have to listen to me on this. I know what I'm talking about.
Hiccup! Astrid called to him, frantic in her distress. What's wrong with him? She grabbed for either side of Chip's face, but he kept trying to shake her off. The barbs of his cheeks sliced her palms. None of the men had thought about trying to interfere, not since Hiccup pulled Firmhuria on the captain. They continued to watch in bafflement as the Viking warrior insisted on calming a crazed beast.
She's trying to pull him back into her control,
Hiccup told her as evenly as he could. He didn't know how to explain that Chip didn't recognize her anymore, that he had seen the glaze creeping up in those green irises, that she would too if she cared to look. Practicably, Astrid didn't want to hear it.
What? She gasped. No, Chip, it's all right, just...
Chip jerked around so violently that Hiccup feared he might soon hurt himself.
Look at me, Chip. You look at me now. Hiccup, how do I stop it? We weren't together long enough, were we? Is that it?
Hiccup wasn't sure where to turn. Should he continue to get Thuggery to see reason before the dragons came through? Or should he help Astrid figure out how to calm Chip? She was right in that she had not spent enough time with the timberjack, as he knew the case would be for the other riders as well. They were too late. Chip was lost to her, and Hiccup didn't have the heart to say it out loud. Hiccup had no idea how much time had passed since he landed on the ship, or how long since he heard that demonic wail carried from the bowels of the mountain. Their entire confrontation thus far felt rushed and fast and nonsensical.
"We're too close," Toothless breathed. "Too close now."
It was the despair set in Toothless's moan that snapped Hiccup into action.
He pulled from Herya's string yet again to spark another threatening projection. "Turn this ship around now, I will sink it like I sunk your last one," he announced as strongly as he could manage in such a noxious, portentous environment. Thuggery was silent for a moment, his pronounced brow pinched. He seemed to realize what Hiccup implied of his other men and their absence.
"You'd kill us all?"
he whispered. No longer did his men cheer their encouragement of his loud declarations of war. They, too, came to realize the deep implication of their absent backup. Their larger weapons were on that ship, their extra men were on that ship. Astrid's desperation continued to mount in the background.
"Chip, stay still, please."
"Trust me, drowning would probably be a more merciful death," Hiccup said. His thumb strained against the golden wire.
Hiccup, tell me how to fix this."
"Turn around now." His arm shook as he hoped it was only felt and not seen. Had he fired too often?
"I need to... Hiccup, why isn't he..."
With a pained expression, Hiccup gave Astrid back his attention. "Astrid," he said with all the softness of someone delivering grave news. "I'm sorry."
"No!"
Astrid rasped. Her knuckles had gone white in their efforts to hold onto the chain securing the wooden ring around Chip's neck. "I can free him, but he won't return to you."
"No,"
she said again. A strange calm seemed to have settled over her shoulders. The chains fell from her hands.
"Come back to Toothless."
"No!" Stony-faced, bright-eyed, and exhaustingly desperate, Astrid wet her lips, put 2 fingers in her mouth, and blew. The shock of the whistle's pitch pierced the fog and tension. Chip stilled, along with the rest of the ship. Even Hiccup and Thuggery had taken their focus off one another to stare at the striking move. The sound of lapping water, creaking wood, and bated breath tarried in the backwash. Hiccup opened his mouth in the tense of saying something, possibly to further apologize to her, possibly to berate her for drawing more attention to them, when, to Hiccup's immense surprise, the timberjack responded. Chip's pupils slit, his eyes brightened, and he looked at Astrid as though meeting her for the first time all over again. A dense rush of air fell from Astrid's mouth, weighted by her relief.
"It's me,"
she said, reaching for him once more. A timberjack had no lips, so Hiccup was surprised further when Chip opened his beak as if to roar, and a sharp, high-pitched shriek to imitate a human whistle emerged. Astrid let out a hysterical laugh, and Hiccup thought her eyes looked a bit glassy under the white of the miasma.
"That's my boy,"
Astrid said in a pleased whisper. She cradled Chip's head with fond hands and brought their crowns very close together. Chip purred as if to say, "That's my girl." Hiccup wanted to smile at their deeper connection, at this step towards progress, but the reality of where they were continued to press in on him like a fatal clamp. In a flurry of movements, Hiccup drew from Herya and shot the anchor of Chip's chains. Then again for a captured gronkel, and 2 more for the zippleback. The explosive power spooked Chip and the flabbergasted Vikings watching. They were too slow to stop Hiccup, and too stunned to rein in the dragons taking flight. Astrid opened her mouth to reproach the archer. He nearly hit her, but could only catch the saddle he threw.
"Saddle up,"
Hiccup ordered. His legs felt weak and his chest hollow. Too much. He fired too much. His voice set off the Vikings. They moved towards Astrid to keep her from flying off, towards Hiccup in their fury. Toothless reared up, flaring his impressive black wingspan, and slammed his paws back on the deck. Simultaneously, and drawing forth an energy he didn't think he had, Hiccup knocked his umpteenth arrow of the day and once again aimed it at Thuggery to further dissuade the meatheads from taking any action. He didn't care about the mutinous glowers or how uncooperative they were sure to be. His concerns for the situation at hand ebbed in favor of the future danger. The air should not have been so cold, not with the small fires left from his bolts licking the furnished wood, and not with the concentrated energy he stressed between his hands. She was coming, for sure.
"Take the dragons,"
Thuggery spat. His features had roughened in his contempt.
"We're already here."
"I'm not leaving you here,"
Hiccup said. He kept darting his gaze to Astrid, willing her to settle up faster. They had to get in the air before the dragons came. They had to get off this boat and get it moving before it was too late.
"We're not leaving until we end this war once and for all,"
said Thuggery. Now he was being stubborn. Hiccup knew it.
"Then I will sink this ship,"
Hiccup promised.
"You are all going to die." And you're going to destroy the rest of the barbaric archipelago in the process."
A low rumbling had begun, or perhaps it had always been there and had only now come to their attention in the quietness following their shouting. Hiccup did not need to guess at the source of this noise.
"Fantastic,"
he growled. "They are coming," Toothless needlessly informed him. His jaw fins and ear fins drooped, but the Night Fury kept up his grim determination. He was prepared to fly into the oncoming storm.
"They're coming,"
Hiccup relayed. He looked at Astrid as he said this. She nodded stiffly, tightening a final saddle strap, and leapt upon Chip's back. The dragon crooned at her familiar weight. Hiccup had a feeling the timberjack would never again fall under the control of the demon. Thuggery straightened.
"We're fighting."
"You're leaving,"
Hiccup rejoined. Cracks upon cracks were heard, overlaying that subterranean thunder. The ocean seemed to shiver around the ship. Meatheads began muttering to one another, squinting at their surroundings. A swing sliced through the air as Chip and Astrid took off, and Hiccup felt some of that condensed tension in his chest loosen. They were one less thing for him to worry about in his endless list of concerns. He took the opportunity to lower his bow. Energy returned to him, energy he hadn't realized he needed, yet it still didn't feel like enough.
"We're going to have to defend ourselves anyway,"
Thuggery said in a raised voice to counter the noise closing in on them. Hiccup snorted.
"Defend yourselves as you leave,"
he snapped. He was wholly fed up with wasting time on this. Thuggery had no backup, and yet he still refused to turn around for pride. He was going to die. Hooligans were going to die. Hiccup shook his head and forced his concentration on something more productive than anger and despair. He took a calming breath for good measure, picked his mask up from the ground, and mounted Toothless without sparing Thuggery another glance. The Night Fury was sprung for action, with his toxic gaze fixated on the scarcely visible volcano wall. Thuggery bristled at Hiccup's dismissive tone.
"You do not tell me or my men what to do. This is my ship."
"This is my territory,"
Hiccup barked back.
"If you try and turn back now, we'll stay to cover you. I'm trying to save you. Now go."
Toothless didn't wait for Hiccup's body to give the command. He shot up, forcing Hiccup's foot to move with the action.
"They're here. She's near. We have this,"
Hiccup whispered.
"We can do this."
Chip and Astrid were at his side in an instant. It could have been the rapid crescendo of thunder rising from the earth that made their sudden proximity so startling, but Hiccup nearly dropped the mask in its fastening.
"That goes for you too, Astrid,"
he said, his frown taut. Astrid scowled.
"I am not leaving you." "Yes, you are,"
Hiccup huffed as the flapping of wings grew louder and louder.
"We rescued the dragons, at least. This is their choice. You need to go back and defend the others."
The balls of innumerable dragons drowned out all other noise. The very air seemed to shake as waves upon waves of winged reptiles disgorged from the volcano's vent. They descended from the mists, wings and fire and color, screams and howls and belching roars. The mountain shed scabs of stone the size of Knorr, sending boulders bouncing down the slope walls and bestrewing the tumult with reverberating cracks. The furious shouts of blood-crazed Vikings rose up to first greet the demon's army. The meatheads were ready to die fighting, even if it meant losing a significant portion of their clan's voices. Toothless and Hiccup shot forward to meet the swarm faster than Astrid had ever seen them move before. She lingered at their backs, momentarily conflicted on whether to obey Hiccup or not. She knew she couldn't keep up with them, not to mention Chip's bout of insanity. It had shaken her confidence. Hiccup's behavior had disturbed her even more. She felt like he wasn't even present for half of this journey, dismissive and distracted and ever troubled. He and Toothless were acting skittish. This wasn't like before the raid, where Hiccup was calm and firm and confident in his flying capabilities. He had the behavior of a man who accepted that death was coming, and it scared her. It made her question how sound his judgment would be working under such fear. This wasn't one of the clear-cut, black-and-white, do-or-don't situations she was used to. There was no obvious right or wrong course of action. There was only action itself and an inconceivable array of possible consequences for any she could choose. Astrid inhaled deeply, drawing in poison and composure all at once.
"Let's go,"
she barked. Chip arced and dropped. Astrid would trust Hiccup to keep the dragons off their back for just a while longer. The pair twisted perpendicular to the water, sweeping in so close to the meathead ship that the men blundered. At the last instant, Chip leveled off and sheared the beakhead clear off the bow.
"Damn it!"
Thuggery cursed.
"You crazy...
Turn back!"
Esther demanded. She knew she couldn't destroy their means of escaping, not this deep into the nest. She and Chip dove again, this time aiming to cut a smaller tear in the sail as another warning.
"You don't have the weapons to fight them all."
Thuggery had to have known this. The bulk of his supply was on his following ship, their catapults and oils and extra hands.
"It's too late,"
he snapped. His grip was tight on his sword. He could recognize the severity of their situation.
"You can still get out of this,"
Astrid hollered.
"Turn back!"
Up above, Hiccup and Toothless continued to buffer the dragons as best they could. At first they attempted to lure the army from the ship, but the dragons seemed to have specific instructions. Eliminate the humans. They would gladly attack Hiccup, but not chase. In unison, Toothless and Hiccup fired at the most concentrated areas, doing their best to set the dragons off track. They weren't teasing the horde this time, safe in their speed and agility. Like his fight with Snotlout, Hiccup was forced into a confined area. But he couldn't leave them. His gut wrenched at the thought of leaving humans to the mercy of the demon, thick-headed though they may be in their ignorance. Toothless correctly read Hiccup's reluctance at abandoning the meatheads. "We can't keep fighting until those humans leave." However, it seemed they would soon be unable to leave while under attack themselves. Their window to do so had left them as dragons began to close in with greater abundance. They still poured from the nest, seemingly without end.
"Are you suggesting we abandon them?"
Pain bloomed against Hiccup's thigh. A very dull-scaled timberjack managed to cut in too close. A moment later, and the beast screamed, sent careening downward from a very overpowered fireball to the stomach, courtesy of Toothless.
"Don't waste your fire,"
Hiccup grunted with the effort of backhanding a bull ruffer with Framhuria's upper limb. The shock she sent through it stunned its wings out of function, and it plummeted into the watery mists.
"Don't bleed on me,"
Toothless countered, and he hurled them into a dizzying downward spin to narrowly avoid the incoming claws and flames. They arced and curved in their dance of evasion, both dragon and human trying to remain conscious of the power they exerted into physical attack. Exhilarated and terrified, Hiccup felt he had spades of energy behind Framhuria. The lightning she produced proved immensely effective against the hides of dragons. While not burning them outright, the electrical pulses could incapacitate them. Hiccup tried to keep a steady read on their surroundings, but the immediate danger posed to their persons quickly wiped the thought of saving the meatheads from his priorities. Their defense had turned into frantic survival. He and Toothless were losing energy, and he had no idea how much longer they could hold out. Time seemed lost to him, but even Hiccup started to notice the space in which they fought seemed to shrink.
"We're—"
Hiccup gasped and lurched away from the elongated claws of a Grimler.
"We can't—"
"We need to get out of here," Toothless snarled. "Forget the humans." But the dragon knew that even if they were to abandon the stupid Vikings, they were far too lost in the throes of the demon's army. They were tired and weakened, putting all their effort into saving beings that didn't deserve to be saved. Escaping would require aid they didn't have.
"I know,"
Hiccup returned, with a similar aggravation to his voice. He flipped them belly up in the air, pulling from Huria's string, and fired above his head from their upside-down position. The lightning rocketed downwards and struck the back of a purple nightmare, sending it crashing onto the deck of the meathead's ship in a boneless heap. The drain was becoming more noticeable with every bolt he loosed. "Hiccup!" The boys righted in time for 3 different shades of fire to blaze over Hiccup's head. Startled, Hiccup looked up to see the descending barrage of dragons scatter and fall with the power of the joint attack. His head whipped to the source.
"What the— Need help?"
Speedy Fist called, streaking past in the wake of the fires. Hiccup stared at him for a moment, dumbfounded, and then blankly turned to see Snotlout, Fishlegs on board, Toughnut, and Roughnut following suit.
"What are you doing here?"
Hiccup gasped. He wanted to rage at them for putting themselves and their dragons in danger, but words failed him. "Helping you, of course," Snotlout boasted. Mongrel shot a jet of stunning orange fire in an arc around them, sending more dragons squawking back.
"But—"
Roughnut wasn't ready. Toughnut and Snotlout shouldn't have gotten so close. How were they this close? It's okay," Toothless said. He sounded as if he suffered from the same sort of wonder as Hiccup.
"Hiccup!"
Astrid cried, her face shiny with ash and sweat like she just spent a day in the forge.
"Hiccup, look!"
His first impulse was to look down. Rock stacks had been knocked down, creating a dam of stone to keep the Vikings from sailing that last half Vika to shore. The front end of Thuggery's ship was crushed. With a start, Hiccup realized his father's vessel was there as well, docked next to the remains of the meathead's last ship and pulling the crew aboard. Around them, bodies and broken weapons rocked with pulsing waves. It should have been a slow, dangerous process of transferring men from ship and water while under fire, which was what caught Hiccup's attention next. There was no fire. Save for the lingering flames dotting driftwood and sails, no dragons attacked. With wide, disbelieving eyes, Hiccup turned his focus to the multitude of tails disappearing into the clouds. The dragons were retreating, and not towards the nest as Hiccup expected, but towards freedom. What? He looked helplessly at Astrid and the other riders, but they were cheering alongside the Vikings below, slapping backs and giving high fives. Merciful Ea! Toothless sounded choked with awe. I would never have believed it if I didn't see it right now. What? Hiccup hissed, shaking his head. Believe what? What's going on? It's such a high concentration of humans that it's working against her. There are forces we cannot see or sense at work, but it's working. Toothless had gained volume with his excitement, and he ended his evaluation with a loud, draconic whoop. Hiccup was too confused to feel fully ready to celebrate just yet. The human minds? Hiccup mumbled. Then dawning arrived. So you're saying this many humans around the dragons shook the control off of them? But no, what about the raids? Surely there were more people then. So many humans close to her, Toothless corrected, still sounding as if he could scarcely believe it himself. Your minds in unison broke her control at the heart of it. Hiccup finally allowed himself to smile. An odd sort of pride he hadn't felt in ages soaked through to his core, a very human pride. See, he teased, we're more than just faulty mammals. Toothless snorted a weak wisp of smoke from each nostril. His igniting chamber ached from the earlier strain. It would be best if he resisted firing for a while. Well, bringing this many humans to her, that was risky. We didn't do it on purpose, Hiccup pointed out. But when are our victories ever on purpose? Hiccup laughed, the same slightly hysterical kind Astrid had when Chip returned to her. The danger was still present. They were still at the nest, but their good fortune was nearly palpable, acting as a healing ointment to the terror he experienced just moments before. Toothless shook his head as he surveyed the Vikings far below. I knew humans had underlying powers of their own, but they're so subtle. We would never see your kind as a threat because you are incapable of offensive magics. To think your breed is capable of an influence reaching this magnitude. Well, I won't explain it to them, Hiccup said, also watching the celebrating Vikings. The meatheads would face serious charges when they were back in clear waters, but for now the victory in their survival sustained a truce. It's probably safer to just let them think they scared the dragons off with their charming Viking demeanor rather than... What is it exactly? I don't know, Toothless huffed. Your admittedly impressive mental capacity. Hiccup laughed again, still breathless. His mouth felt moist from the ragged gas trapped within his mask, his head felt light and stuffy. The poison seemed to have cleared slightly from the activity of 1,000 wings circling. Or perhaps, like the control, the proximity of so many humans somehow drove it away. Are you okay? Toothless asked, belatedly. Fine, Hiccup stated, nonplussed. He blinked at his right hand, where from Hurria was gripped, warm against the frozen air. He hadn't realized how much energy he put into using her, and it wasn't until now that the rush of battle started to recede, did he feel the drain once more. He looked away from the last of the fleeing dragons to the top of Toothless's head. You? Fine. Hiccup! Fishlegs called from Mongrel's back. The nightmare rose in altitude to hover at his side. Hiccup, we did it! You didn't do much, Snotlout corrected. You just tried to crack my ribs as I was kicking ass. Fishlegs appeared most offended. I hit one in the face with my hand. How are they? Hiccup interjected. He gestured to the several dozen non-riders that survived the short tussle with the demon army. Well enough. We had some losses ourselves, but mostly meatheads before we got here, Snotlout reported. Hiccup nodded, having expected as much. A rather self-important smirk came across Snotlout's face. Of course, he continued, if it were anyone but Vikings fighting down there wouldn't be much left. Behind him, Fishlegs rolled his eyes. We did manage miraculously well, given the odds, the blonde admitted. But this was something that should have been avoided altogether. Hey, Hiccup jerked at Astrid's softly spoken word. Chip swung down to poise at Hiccup's other side so that he and Astrid faced each other at a diagonal. She was grinning. You're bleeding, Astrid mentioned casually. Hiccup blinked and followed her line of sight to his upper arm, a part unprotected by Fury armor, to see a wide tear in his sleeve and jagged flesh beneath. Weird. He couldn't feel anything yet. His leg throbbed, however, a steady spread of darkness moved across the material of his pants. He looked back at her and said, You're burned. Her smile turned rueful, and she wiped some hair out of her eyes. Her arm was dark and blistered, her wraps half unraveled. On her forehead, cutting into her eyebrow, was another stark burn. They'll turn into pretty good scars, she said casually. Toothless's ears perked up. You should get those treated now, said Hiccup seriously. He had too much experience with burns to leave them unattended. He would have said as much, too, had something not pounded against his ears. Hiccup stood to attention, much as Toothless had just done. A thud. Hiccup swore he just heard a thud, like the first beat of a thunderclap, the first beat of a war drum. I will, Astrid assured him with a bit of exasperation in her tone. Don't worry about it. So, do you know why they left? Huh? Hiccup spared her a distracted glance before squinting back at the nest. Some more the fog had cleared, the rocks looked to be rattling again. Why they left, Astrid repeated. The dragons? It couldn't have been our awesome fighting, no matter what Snotlout says, because even I could see we were losing. She's coming. She's...
Return! Return! Return my fleet!
Hiccup felt as though he couldn't comprehend this fast enough. An awful sort of panic seized him.
Spineless worms, your loath deceit!
Everything was okay a moment ago, and now her voice was drumming in his ears. The thuds grew louder, more frequent. Get back! Hiccup bellowed down to the Vikings below. The riders turned to him first, Astrid not a fathom away, looking on in shocked concern. What? Hiccup, get back! Hiccup shouted again, and this time the Vikings started to pay him attention. He looked to Astrid. She's coming! The demon's coming, and you need to get them out of here now! Astrid nodded, not questioning, not asking for elaboration. She and Chip dived to the ships. You need to leave, Hiccup could hear her saying. We need to get out of here.
What is it?
Toughnut asked. More fragments of rock, ranging from as small as a pebble to as large as a horse, began to skitter down, shaken free from a power within. The continuous patter sounded like the first wave of rain in a coming monsoon.
A passion, human, burns and blights.
Go, Hiccup said desperately to the twins. Go help them get out of here.
But your ugly hearts, your wrongs and rights.
It was worse than the oncoming dragons. The noise, the terrible, terrible noise. Go! The top of the volcano exploded. An ash cloud of concentrated choking poison erupted from its mouth, preceding the demon herself. Her great, horrible head shattered through the summit of the nest and knocked down the rock walls like a hatchling breaking from its shell. Hiccup was only slightly more prepared than the others, but never had he seen more than the scale of her mouth in a shadowed cavern. She was gargantuan, all jaw and teeth and too many eyes. Beards of Thor, Snotlout breathed. Go now! Hiccup roared downward. The Vikings were scrambling, screaming, fighting to get onto Stoic's ship. The mountain gave way a little further as she pressed her weight on the edge with the 5-digit paw.
Return!
The demon screamed hoarsely within a ghastly roar to the clouds. Her jowls shook.
Return! Return!
Cover them! Hiccup ordered the riders over the din of panicking humans. Fishlegs! With toothless cooperation, he swept into Mongrel's side. What can you tell me about her? Small eyes, Fishlegs yelped. His voice cracked.
It relies on hearing and smell. Likely has little agility. Shape of its crown implies thick bone, hard to penetrate, but weak-skinned, going by wear and decay of the hide. Underside wings, flying is not its strength, but strong. Chances of defeating her?
Hiccup thought he might try. Fishlegs calmed his nervous stutter to give Hiccup an unappreciative look.
I'm not answering that.
You will suffer,
the demon screamed with a mighty inhale.
You will burn.
Hiccup felt his stomach drop. The poison in the air appeared to swirl around her oversized muzzle and pull into her throat to feed heat brewing within.
Scatter!
Snotloud howled, figuring the same thing as Hiccup. Her next scream came with the most powerful jet of fire Hiccup had ever had the misfortune to witness. He could not watch. The heat was too awful and burned his eyes and skin, even when he rose far beyond its danger. But he could hear. He heard the swearing and anguish of Vikings abandoning ship, the splashes of bodies hitting water, and the pops of the woodwork exploding. Hiccup pulled away the arm he used to protect his face, his throat sour with sick.
"Dad!"
he cried. He was hardly aware of the riders shouting their own torment. There was too much smoke and fire to see anything specific, too many bodies to be counted, too many bobbing, Vikingless helmets dotting the waters. The demon released a dark and cruel laugh every bit as appalling as her presence. Hiccup knew he could not have been the only human hearing it. It was too loud and too terrible to go unnoticed.
Cry your tears, your human woes. Curse yourself, this path you chose.
But the other humans were busy crying out in the burning waters, screaming for one another and fighting to stay alive. None gave any inclination to hearing anything supernatural.
Your lords, your riches, your wretched whims. Your progress soars, your future dims.
The demon sounded gleeful with her sinister vengeance. Hiccup felt rage seize inside of him, an ugly, sweet sensation, and his own need for revenge rejuvenated his fatigue. His father was on that ship, his mentor, and his friends. Hardly aware of his own actions, he aimed from Hurya, pulled her string, and fired from stores he believed to be long since depleted.
Wretch!
The demon bellowed in pain and was forced to swallow her second build-up of heat. Her head snapped to the side, where Hiccup could see one of her 3 eyes clenched shut and leaking blood. The other 2 narrowed on Toothless's dark wings. Gigantic, gaping nostrils flared.
A playful rider have we here. You aim to die, to join those dear.
The demon bared her teeth, all 70 of them, and a persimmon glow flickered to life beyond her tongue once more. Hiccup followed Toothless's cue to make a sudden, steep climb, half reading his thoughts, half trusting blindly.
She, weak now, the humans, her host lost.
Toothless began to shout in a long, wavering growl as they moved. Despite himself, Hiccup had to stare at the back of his best friend's head. An out-of-place apprehension took hold of him because, for the first time in years, Hiccup could barely understand Toothless.
"Toothless?"
he whispered in uncertainty. What had happened? Was the bond slipping? Had he done something? Did he unwittingly choose humans over Toothless when he insisted they stay to defend the meatheads? So lost in this ill-timed concern, Hiccup barely noticed how high they climbed, or hardly questioned why they moved so far from the ships and the demon. Behind him, a great shuddering breath could be heard. Hiccup could almost feel the air sucking them back into the accursed jowls. He risked a peek behind him. The demon had her maw reared and opened and directed at them. They weren't moving from her line of fire. For one breath longer, Hiccup agonized over Toothless's lack of response to him. They breached the thick of the clouds, the demon temporarily disappearing from sight. And it was then, when Hiccup's fingers tightened over the leather of the saddle and his legs throbbed from the sting of the wind, that he felt it. Much like his first month under Toothless's watch, Hiccup sensed what the dragon wanted him to understand. "Trust in me, Hiccup." The words rushed over him in lieu of the wind, which had let up as they came to a suspended halt in the rise.
"Attack!"
Toothless bellowed in a prehistoric roar. There was something ancient and multi-layered to a voice Hiccup once thought he knew. Had he not been riding Toothless himself, the human would have sworn that it was 1,000 Night Furies crying for support, and not one.
"Toothless, what?"
Hiccup sucked in a breath. Dragons began emerging from the clouds, the very clouds they had once escaped into. diving, all of them, with wings drawn in tight and their mouths open for over a dozen budding flames. A wild smile came to Hiccup's face as he helped Toothless fall into a missile of their own.
Come on!
What is he doing? Astrid gasped when Hiccup and Toothless suddenly shot up and away from the nest, much like the dragons who were recently freed. The boys travelled high in the opposite direction of the demon until the clouds obscured them from view.
We should get out of here too,
Toughnut said gravely. No, Astrid snarled. Her father was on that ship, in the water. So was their chief. Roughnut was down there searching for Tumble, and Snotnout nearly fell off of Mongrel trying to ensure his father was alive. She watched as the demon opened its jaw impossibly wide, the glow of death burgeoning in its throat. Despairingly, she looked at the water, at the dozens, hundreds of bodies fighting against tide and flame. Time and sound escaped her for a moment as her eyes searched the mass of writhing arms and heads. They couldn't be dead. She refused to believe it. A high scream pierced the air. The riders all looked up, willing to look at anything but the demon and its unstoppable warpath. The Night Fury had returned, Hiccup aboard, and barely a tailspan behind them must have been 30 dragons, thought to have been well out of reach by now. Astrid heard Speedy Fist gasp. Are they returning to her?
Maybe they got him, Toughnut mumbled. She could be controlling Hiccup too.
But both theories fell through when the demon opened her mouth wider yet, as though to swallow the small rabble, and the dragons continued their course with unwavering determination. They're going to fly into her fire.
You'll get killed.
No, Fishleg's cry was the loudest and yet the least despairing. No, he wouldn't. Astrid didn't need to ask. The dragons swooped, and each and every one released their fire into the demon's mouth an instant before it could discharge its own. Reds and oranges, blues and purples, long and thin and fat and round, fire of every texture unionized in the very crux, beating the release of the demon's stream by a hair's breadth. At the forefront of this motley volley was a streak of lightning and an orb of azure. No Viking could quite tell what happened next, because a blinding explosion of unmatched proportions set off inside the demon. A gale exploded outward, throwing men back in the water, practically snuffing out the flames that aided their vessels.
Yeah!
Hiccup crowed with his fists in the air. His ears were left ringing, and his body suffocated under the overwhelming heat. Momentarily senseless, the rider could not tell how many of the dragons escaped, or if they weren't quite fast enough. He didn't know if the surviving Vikings joined him in his applause, or if they watched at all. He didn't know if any were alive to watch. It was with this thought in mind that Hiccup welcomed the screams of the demon. He suffered the firestorm's unbearable brightness and could just make it out, through the flames surging from her pores and the smoke mushrooming over the mouth of the volcano, black talons tearing through the stone lip as the hellish creature fell back into the depth of her eyrie.
Feed me my own fire, will you?
She's not dead, Toothless warned. Hiccup could fully understand him once more, taking some alarm out of the statement.
A hollow victory, without ado.
The disembodied voice had gurgled and faded in its deliverance. She was dying.
But she will be...
Hiccup's arm nearly wrenched from its socket when Thrumherja tugged backwards.
What?
He tightened his hold on her to keep the bow from flying off. Her grip had become unbearably hot against his palm, soaking through his graces so readily that she may have turned them back into liquid.
Thrumherja!
Hiccup bit out against the sharp pain.
Where are you?
Follow me, man and beast. Follow me where I shall feast.
We're going after her. Startled, Hiccup stared down at the Night Fury.
Toothless?
She will never be this weak again, Hiccup, Toothless grunted. You know this. The only reason Hiccup didn't resist Toothless's change in direction was to lessen Thrumherja's insistent pull. He escaped certain death more times than he cared to acknowledge that day, and still the weapon was not satisfied.
We're pushing our luck, Hiccup griped. We should go back to the ship and see who's injured.
Do you really want to simply trust that she is dead? This may be our only opportunity to make sure she is not coming back. We have to press our advantage now. Hiccup couldn't respond. The explosion had passed, but too much heat and smoke polluted the air above the volcano, air they had just flown into. He had his eyes closed and all his concentration on tucking in against the heat as much as possible, still clinging to Framherja with stubborn determination.
"She ruined my life,"
Toothless added. The Night Fury was getting worked up. Hiccup could feel the energy from Toothless's indignation, and, amazingly, it seemed to feed into Framherja as if Hiccup were nothing more than a conduit between the two. She agreed with Toothless, pulling Hiccup's torso forward as she demanded they follow the demon's fall. Framherja wanted them to finish the demon too. Hiccup could read that much from her. And if Framherja wanted this, then so did the gods. Hiccup relented silently, still attempting to mute every flooded sense of his but sound. Framherja must have picked up on his agreement because her abuse to his arm lessened significantly. Toothless must have as well, because Hiccup sensed something very gracious in his projected "thanks." Together they dove. Once again Hiccup was left at the discretion of Toothless's judgment. The demon left in her wake a thick, noxious trail of black smoke that Hiccup had to hold his breath through. He was a victim to sensation. He felt like they were free-falling, and he pressed against Toothless's back as tightly as he could.
40 spans below you burn.
Her voice grew in volume as they closed in on their destination, wherever that may be. Sweat soaked Hiccup's tunic, his own body heat trapped beneath his crest in the sweltering pit.
40 more means no return.
Hiccup knew when the setting changed. It was abrupt. The air had shifted, the temperature switching in extremes, and the human wrist squinting through his lashes to see blackness still surrounded him. But it wasn't smoke. Hiccup opened his eyes fully, trying to adjust to this vacuum of light. They were still moving downwards. The air still stung his face. It bit his cheeks and nose with chill. Where was the fire, and the miasma and the smoke?
"Are we—"
He choked a bit in the cold.
"Did we go to the same nest?"
His voice echoed to indicate that there were walls of some kind.
"Yes,"
Toothless said, though there was a bit of uncertainty to his own insistence.
"Huh."
Hiccup distinctly remembered the demon's roost as being fiery and hot.
"It was as I expected at first, but then I don't know what happened. We could never pass this far down before,"
Toothless said.
"You couldn't?" "No, not that we'd want to, but—"
Framherja's heat contrasted so strongly with the new atmosphere that her presence seemed to scream at him.
"It's her,"
Hiccup said.
"Framherja. She's bringing us down."
The darkness ended. It came so fast that both of the boys were wholly unprepared for the light that struck them. Hiccup's eyes felt as though they were pushed back into his skull from the harsh exposure. He brought a hand up and blinked the spots from his vision, desperately trying to inspect his surroundings.
"What is this?"
The words fell from Hiccup's mouth in puffs of air. He watched his breath curl out before him with the same sort of worry that channeled through his veins. It was freezing. Freezing? For falling into the depth of a volcano? Hiccup knew without having to question the matter that they were not, in fact, in the volcano. It was impossible, for they were now in an underground world. A world of mist and ice and rock and miles of cold. Something crawled along his skin, bubbled within the hollow of his lungs. Something wrong and powerful. Framherja shook in his hold, and much like he could occasionally understand Toothless on a deep, indescribable level, he felt a word pass through his mind that was not of his doing. Niflheim. He stared, blank-faced, at the weapon, questioning, denying. Then he looked back out, over the valleys of the unnatural, rosts between the world as he knew it. It stifled him, both the disbelief and the simple acceptance.
"Thor Almighty, we aren't in Midgard anymore,"
Hiccup whispered. Goosebumps rode up his flesh, and every hair on his arm stretched beneath his graces.
We're in... Oh, gods. Toothless, she really is a demon, isn't she?"
A demon straight from Niflheim. A Jotun?
"I don't care where she's from."
The slight to Toothless's pride rang in his ears, much as the explosion. It pushed his blood and aroused his resolve.
"I care where she ends."
Hiccup swallowed down something he humorlessly dubbed as homesickness.
"Where is she?"
he whispered. Though the air was thick with miasma and this world riddled with obstacles, nothing could explain a creature of such enormity disappearing.
"She's here. She came down here, I'm sure of it."
They flew around in a cautious circle, squinting against the cold, prickling the moisture of their eyes and straining their senses. Hiccup could hear a profound silence underlying the echoes of what sounded like fluid. "What's down there?" he asked. "Not her," Toothless grumbled. But he lowered for his human's curiosity. It's liquid, see? Water." The broom tempered as they neared, and, sure enough, a calm, frosted plain of water came into focus. Hiccup leaned over to get a better look at their reflection. The undisturbed surface gave him a perfect mirror image of Toothless's belly and his own pale face peeking over. "Water? Down here?" And it wasn't just a puddle. The entire floor of this world consisted of water. No flat patch of rock protruded. Not in his immediate vision, anyway. Hiccup had only just begun to comprehend how water got down here, and how much of it, for that matter, other than this truly being Niflheim, when he saw eyes staring up at him. Eyes that were not his own. Horror seized his heart with a barbed grip, so sudden and tight he wanted to retch, but Toothless's calm kept him from crying out. "It's a dragon," Toothless said to quiet him. "It's already dead." "A dragon?" Hiccup repeated under his breath. Despite his scare, Hiccup urged Toothless to get closer. He looked for the eyes again and found one pair, then another, and another, and another. Watching them from beneath the water was not just one dragon, but thousands. More than dragons. Hiccup saw cows, sheep, sharks, whales, dogs, millions of creatures trapped in suspension, their lifeless body preserved in the terrible cold. The only thing that could disrupt Hiccup's riveted perturbation was the sensation of a blade piercing his foot. The pain shocked him horribly, so much so that he yelped, jerking. Toothless wrenched them up and away from the water. "What is it? Are you okay?" "Yeah." Hiccup squinted at his foot and experimentally tried to move his toes within his boot. He couldn't feel them, it was so cold, but he could see weak movement beneath the skin of his frost-covered shoes. His next shock came from an appalling crack. Hiccup twisted in the saddle to see the scale coating of the tail fin now had a large fissure running through it. "Damn!" Hiccup kicked the tail fin into first gear to pull them away from the baleful sea. Grim, Toothless said, "It was that water. There's something very unnatural about it." "Everything about this place is unnatural," Hiccup griped. He squinted back at the thick coating of fog blanketing the water. A water so cold that anything approaching it would ice cover, and so dense that it could keep bodies from floating to the surface. "How could water be this cold and not freeze?" "It doesn't matter," Toothless said impatiently. I think that is the food we were bringing to her. She didn't even eat most of it." Hiccup was still stuck on the water. "If we are in Niflheim, then—" He racked his mind for old teachings. "A spring, a boiling spring? Focus, Hiccup. Forget the water. We have to find her." "I'm sorry," Hiccup said with just as much agitation. "It's not every day I fall into another world." "She's here," Toothless hissed. Hiccup's breath stilled. "Where?" he whispered. "I can sense her. She's dying." "Right," Hiccup muttered with a mutinous look at his brow. "If she is dying, then why even come down here?"
"The task I've seen, your open minds."
Her voice came from everywhere, and everywhere was everywhere. Endless belts of rock and clouds surrounding them. Hiccup tried his damnedest to pinpoint where she spoke from, but his heartbeat thudded annoyingly loud in his ears, and his breathing came in heavy, audible tide.
"Weighed down by duty's binds."
"Over there." Toothless spun them and shot a plasma bolt into a crevice of deep fog. The heat highlighted the vapors curling around every rock, dispersed the clouds with a very odd, rippling effect, and for a moment the air had cleared. "Gods!" Hiccup swallowed. Neither male looked in the direction of Toothless's flame, as they should have done. They stared, instead, into the temporarily unclouded ether, at the crannies and clefts of the endless walls. They stared at hundreds upon hundreds of identical, smooth stones, ovular and shining. "Eggs," Toothless croaked. "She's breeding." "Of course." Hiccup couldn't breathe. The sight to him was horrifying, straight out of his nightmares. He didn't have to wonder whose eggs they were. He didn't want to wonder what would happen when they hatched. "She's all the food, and when they hatch will be—" "Move!"
Monstrous jaws extended from the darkness, miasma spilling between conical teeth. Hiccup reacted as quickly as Toothless. They darted out of the way, and the demon clamped on nothing but frosted air.
"Thy line is drawn, thy sentence set,"
the demon screeched, pushing off stone towers. She had smoke and blood flying from her mouth as she gave chase. Her skin was blistered and her wings torn, but she came after them with the power of a juggernaut. The axe rattled on their shelves from the clout of her wings.
"This reckless quest your last regret."
She snapped and snapped at them, swinging her clubbed tail when they ventured too far from her to keep them from escaping. The boys were sluggish in their usual fantastic agility. They started to cut closer to their attacks with every dodge.
"A gift, a curse, it matters not. This ignorance shall earn your spot."
"She moves pretty fast for her size," Hiccup snarled. She slammed a huge claw down on them, and their automati alone saved them in slipping through her fingers.
"Among the shriveled and the damned."
"I know. Got a plan?"
"A slumber deep you reap in hand."
"Might," Hiccup said shortly. "Have any fire left?"
"Hardly," Toothless grunted. "It won't make a difference on her."
"It's not for her." His arms felt weak and numb. Hiccup feared he would let go of Framherja and not realize until she was beyond saving. But survival coursed strongly in his blood, and from his heart his anger called for justice. Justice for the millions of lives ruined at her cruelty, anger for his father. Hiccup's heel slammed into third. They twisted from the mercy of the demon's jaw yet again, her putrid breath curling in their lungs, and together rocketed towards the cavernous breach where she once hid. She seemed to take great delight in their maneuver of trapping themselves.
"Powdered bones and blood congealed."
"Aim with me," Hiccup whispered. Every fin on Toothless's head pressed flat against the skull.
"Thou'st be told who moaned and squealed."
"Okay." They fired in concert, each weak with her final shot, but both combining into a sputtering, thriving blaze of white-blue.
"No! No! No!"
The spindling orb slammed into a blue-speckled pearl the size of a human house. "Up!" Toothless roared, but even the terrifying cry of a night fury was silenced, and the detonation of their doing. Hiccup could hear a series of explosions follow. Heat over heat climbed up the towers of rock, reaching for them, clawing at their backs. Hiccup made himself as flat as he possibly could, willing Toothless to climb faster. Flames rushed upward. The infinite popping stormed behind him, and Hiccup swore he could hear the screams of demons as well. Unborn demons, perhaps, unwittingly killing each other as each ignited gas chamber set another off. "Go!" he whispered. "Go!" Fire filled his nose and mouth, through his mask, scorching his throat, choking.
"No! No! No!"
The demon's voice was frightfully loud. She was right behind them. Hiccup knew it. He could feel her fury and smell her fetid breath.
"No! No! No!"
Her voice grew louder, chasing them up. A horrific mixture of heat and cold bloomed after them with flaming hands and icy claws, grasping, trying to pull them down. Hiccup didn't know where they were, if they crossed over back into Midgard, or if they were still caught in Niflheim. They could have been caught in between, in the nest that held so many dragons prisoner. Worse yet, didn't know where she was. He could hear her screaming incoherently as though about to swallow them, but he could hardly see his own hand when he squinted against the blistering toxins. Up, up they went, Toothless beating his wings frantically, climbing up as fast as he could into an obscure cloud of smoke and poison. There was no end to it, no end to the fever and death grappling for their lives. Hiccup couldn't breathe. He'd never taste fresh air again. If she didn't kill them, then the fire surely would. The poison would. Then something snapped. Hiccup's stomach clenched from the twinge across his chest, and he felt the only welcome warmth leave him. "No!" he gasped. Hiccup leaned back and reached with a bone-weary arm for Framherja, her broken string flickering in the air as if to wave goodbye. The shift of weight came too sudden and strained the already damaged equipment. 2 more snaps of cable were Hiccup's only warning before the cruel hand of fate pushed him from his seat. "Hiccup!" It was the worst sensation Toothless could ever recall experiencing. Worse than their first test flight, when that human boy, who he had grown quite fond of, had fallen. Worse than the metal contraption which wrapped around his wings, and far, far worse than feeling his fin ripping from his tail as he was tall through a forest. "Hiccup! Hiccup, no!"
For such a rushed escape, Hiccup strangely felt like he had all the time in the world to watch Toothless's body fall away. He observed the transition of shock to horror in Toothless's eyes. He saw the dragon struggle to twist in the air, the unmanned tail fin flapping uselessly against the vortex of savage winds. "Don't, Toothless," he wanted to say, but the exhaustion of overusing Frumherja struck him hard, and Hiccup found he couldn't do much more than watch. It brought on a calm and welcome detachment. Idly, Hiccup wondered if he were actually falling this fast, or if it was the rushing fire which made it seem so. He continued to plummet, into the volcano, or into the water, or even into Vinland. He had no idea how far they made it in the first place. The only thing Hiccup knew was that Toothless wouldn't make it to him in time. The dragon should have been focusing on saving himself at this point. Blackness threatened Hiccup's conscience. He didn't know if he was passing out or if something great and dark was swallowing him, but it spread, tunneling his vision until he could only see Toothless's frightened eyes, and fire, and smoke, and a final gleam of gargantuan teeth before the darkness devoured him.